Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the entire universe of information you've sent us and distill it down to the most essential, surprising, and truly insightful nuggets. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the American heartland, peeling back the layers of history, politics, and unique culture that define the 19th state admitted to the Union, Indiana.
It's a deep dive into a place that truly defines the word crossroads. We have a significant stack of sources here: historical texts, geographical surveys, and recent economic data, all providing a comprehensive composite. Our mission is to quickly synthesize the most crucial and sometimes baffling facts about the Hoosier state, ensuring you walk away not just informed, but genuinely surprised by what you learn.
And we have to start right where the confusion begins, with the state's most famous identifier. The state is Indiana, but the residents are Hoosiers. If you're a native, a proud resident, or even just a long-term transplant, you are a Hoosier. Yet no one definitively knows where that word came from.
It is genuinely one of the great American linguistic mysteries. And it's a brilliant place to start because the leading theory fundamentally challenges the state's modern image. The official historical bureaus and, etymologists generally point toward an origin in the upland South areas like Virginia, Kentucky, and parts of Tennessee.
So it migrated north. But what did it mean when it landed?
It wasn't a compliment initially. It was a vernacular term used to describe a backwoodsman, a rough countryman, or even a country bumpkin. It spoke to a certain rugged, untamed frontier identity.
I love that. A term that once meant rough country folk is now synonymous with some of the most sophisticated college basketball in the world. That contradiction itself is the first great insight.
It sets the stage for the complexity we're about to uncover. Now, regarding the formal name, Indiana is straightforward. It means land of the Indians, or Indian land, a name given when the Northwest Territory was divided in 1800, creating the Indiana Territory. But there's a fascinating footnote here. The name was formally used earlier, dating back to a 1768 land claim in what is now West Virginia. That claim was specifically named for the Iroquois, who were recognized as the previous owners of the territory.
Okay, so we have the official name pointing to indigenous land ownership and the nickname pointing to rough Anglo-American settlement. That tension defines the state's historical trajectory.
Absolutely. The identity of Indiana is as a crossroads, and not just geographically, though that's critical. It's a historical crossroads, having navigated incredibly intense frontier conflicts, particularly with indigenous resistance leaders like Tecumseh. It made immense sacrifices for the Union during the Civil War, survived spectacular financial booms and crashes, and as our sources show, experienced truly significant political and cultural volatility, including one of the most intense periods of Ku Klux Klan political control in the 1920s. The sheer diversity of these experiences, packed into one Midwestern state, is what makes this material so rich.
Okay, let's unpack this history, and we need to go back quite a ways, starting with the ancient roots before recorded history even began in the territory.
We begin with the Paleo-Indians, around 8000 BC, who arrived in the region after the massive glaciers of the last ice age retreated. These were small, nomadic groups, primarily hunters of megafauna like mastodons. Their evidence is mainly basic chipped stone tools found across the state. This evolved into the Archaic period, roughly 5000 BC, where the environment was warmer, and we see the start of earthwork mounds and middens, suggesting the groups were settling down and establishing more permanent seasonal settlements.
And then we reach the truly complex civilization, the Mississippian culture. I think this is a crucial point for listeners. This wasn't just small bands of people.
No, this was a massive, sophisticated culture that emerged around 1000 AD. In Indiana, its northernmost reach was Angel Mounds, a gigantic urban settlement that dominated the area near present-day Evansville. We're talking about highly organized, complex societies whose cities were designed based on their specific cosmology, featuring massive central plazas and large platform mounds, some reaching 40 feet high, where leaders lived and rituals were performed. This was agriculture, trade, and politics on a grand scale.
And what's the historical tragedy here?
The tragedy is that this flourishing civilization completely collapsed in the region by the mid-15th century, decades, or perhaps a century, before European contact. The reasons for this decline, whether disease, warfare, or environmental change, are still unclear, creating a vacuum. By the time the French arrived, the historic tribes we know, primarily the Algonquin-speaking peoples like the Shawnee, Miami, and Alini, were the dominant presence, later joined by refugee tribes like the Delaware, pushed west by Iroquois expansion.
That sets the stage for the arrival of the Europeans. Who plants the first flag?
The first European to enter that territory was the French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, in 1679. He traversed the area near present-day South Bend along the St. Joseph River.
And his entry wasn't about settling in a large, permanent way, but about economics, the fur trade.
Exactly. The French established a network of strategic trading posts to control the lucrative fur trade between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. Key posts included Vincennes, Fort Miami, now Fort Wayne, and Fort Wheatnon on the Wabash River. This French influence led the local tribes to side with the French Canadians during the French and Indian War.
When the British win in 1763, the entire dynamic changes. The British create the Royal Proclamation of 1763. What's the immediate political ramification of that in the territory?
The British victory forced the French out, but their subsequent proclamation was the spark that helped ignite the revolution. By designating all lands west of the Appalachians as an Indian reserve, they fundamentally blocked colonial expansion into what is now Indiana and the rest of the Ohio Valley. This move was deeply unpopular with the American colonists who felt entitled to that western land.
And the revolution brought the fighting right into the territory. This is where George Rogers Clark makes his name.
Yes. While much of the war happened on the East Coast, the sources credit George Rogers Clark's actions in the West as being absolutely pivotal. His successful capture of Vincennes and Fort Sackville from the British in 1779 is seen as changing the course of the war by denying the British troops a staging area for attacking the colonies from the West. It secured the Northwest Territory for the nascent American nation.
Once the U.S. takes control and establishes the Indiana Territory in 1800, the focus shifts rapidly to organized indigenous removal. This is where William Henry Harrison, the first governor, becomes central.
Harrison, the future president, spent his governorship actively pursuing the removal of indigenous populations to clear the lands for American settlers. This was met with fierce and highly organized resistance, led by the Shawnee chief Tecumseh and his brother, the religious leader Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet. They urged a pan-tribal union to reject European influence and resist all land sales.
This led to the pivotal Battle of Tippecanoe.
In 1811, Harrison launched a preemptive expedition against the Prophet's town. The resulting Battle of Tippecanoe ended in a tactical U.S. victory, but the resistance truly ended with Tecumseh's death in 1813 during the War of 1812. His death shattered the pan-tribal confederation. This was the turning point that allowed the U.S. government to systematically extinguish Native American land titles.
And that extinguishing involved forced treaties and purchases.
Exactly. The U.S. acquired land through treaties such as the Treaty of St. Mary's in 1818, which acquired about half the state's central area, famously known as the New Purchase, and the Treaty of Mississiniwas in 1826, which acquired the final reserve lands in the Northeast. This resulted in the systematic removal of most tribes west of the Mississippi River in the 1820s and 1830s, often under duress.
With the land cleared, the path to statehood was open. Indiana joins the Union on December 11, 1816, as the 19th state. The capital, initially in Corydon, moves to Indianapolis in 1825. Now begins the drive to populate and develop.
The state rapidly attracted immigrants, primarily Germans, who remain the largest reported ancestry today, along with significant numbers of Irish and English settlers. The goal was to connect this new state to the rest of the nation. The arrival of the steamboat on the Ohio River and the construction of the National Road were hugely significant in facilitating this early settlement and commerce.
This ambition to rapidly transition from frontier to developed state leads us directly to the Indiana Mammoth Internal Improvement Act of 1836, which is a textbook example of overreach.
It is a critical historical moment that defines Indiana's modern identity. The legislature passed this ambitious, multi-million-dollar act to construct a comprehensive network of canals, turnpikes, and railroads. They intended to connect every major region of the state, but the plan was astronomically expensive, far exceeding the state's capacity to finance it, especially when a financial panic hit the U.S. market.
The result was total bankruptcy. How did the state manage that financial trauma?
The state defaulted on its debts. The ensuing financial crisis was so severe that it took decades to resolve, forcing Indiana to negotiate heavily with bondholders. Ultimately, the state repudiated a significant portion of the debt related to the canals, which were largely unfinished. However, the existing canals and turnpikes drastically increased land and produced values, which meant that while the state government was fiscally ruined, the individual landowners and farmers saw long-term economic benefit. It was a brutal but ultimately fruitful market correction.
So the political identity of the Hoosier state was literally forged in the fire of financial disaster. That's a huge legacy.
Absolutely. The direct, painful lesson of 1836 resulted in a fundamental structural change codified in the Second State Constitution in 1851. They included a specific, ironclad provision prohibiting the state from ever assuming public debt again. This fiscal conservatism is now a defining characteristic of Indiana's political life.
Interestingly, that same 1851 Constitution included two hugely conflicting mandates.
That's the tension of the mid-19th century. On one hand, you have that progressive mandate for a uniform system of common schools, equally open to all and free of tuition, a groundbreaking commitment. On the other, the Constitution included the deeply regressive Article 13, which sought to bar further immigration of free people of color and formerly enslaved persons.
How long did that exclusionary policy stand?
It was legally struck down in 1866, with the Indiana Supreme Court citing the 13th and 14th Amendments, and it was formally removed by amendment in 1881. But the historical sources are clear. Exclusionary practices didn't vanish. The period throughout the 1890s saw the implementation of sundown towns across the state, enforcing racial segregation and exclusion at the local community level.
Then the Civil War hits, and Indiana, despite its complicated racial politics, fully commits to the Union.
It was decisive. Indiana was the first Western state to mobilize for the Union cause. The state legislature responded to Lincoln's call for 7,500 volunteers in 1861 with such enthusiasm that thousands of men had to be turned away. By the end of the war, Indiana supplied over 208,000 soldiers. The sacrifice was immense. Over 35% of those enlisted became casualties, and more than 24,000 Hoosiers died fighting for the Union.
And yet they largely avoided the physical devastation of the war, as most fighting occurred elsewhere.
Only two minor conflicts took place on Hoosier soil. The Newburgh Raid, a bloodless capture of a small town, and the Battle of Corydon, part of Morgan's Raid. This sparing of infrastructure meant Indiana could immediately pivot to industrial expansion after the war, focused on meatpacking, mining, and machinery production.
And now we get to the late 1880s, and a massive natural resource discovery changes the whole economic map of the state, particularly the North.
The discovery of abundant, cheap natural gas in the late 1880s fueled an extraordinary industrial boom. This attracted heavy, high-energy consuming industries like steel production and early automotive manufacturing to the northern counties. This led to the rapid, planned expansion of cities like South Bend and Fort Wayne, and the entirely new industrial behemoth, Gary, which was founded in 1906 by U.S. Steel and quickly became a global center for steel production.
And Indiana truly led the early auto world, right?
They were pioneers. Haynes-Apperson, operating out of Kokomo, was in production by 1896, making it the nation's first commercially successful auto company. The state was home to numerous early car manufacturers. That history is literally cemented in the concrete of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, built in 1909, formalizing Indiana's role as the motorsports capital.
Now we enter the 1920s, we have to discuss the immense and frankly terrifying political force the Ku Klux Klan became in the state.
This is a profound and often overlooked chapter of American history. The Indiana Klan, organized in 1915, grew at an explosive rate in the 1920s. It leveraged anxieties surrounding rapid industrialization, European immigration, and urban growth. They cast a wide net, targeting Catholics, Jews, immigrants, African Americans, and anyone they considered morally or politically suspect.
The penetration into the government was nearly absolute.
The numbers are staggering. By 1925, membership peaked at an estimated 250,000 Hoosiers, representing nearly 30% of all native-born white men in the state. This wasn't just a social club. This was political control. They controlled the governor's office, held supermajorities in the General Assembly, and commanded local political machines. Winning an election in many parts of Indiana required the Klan's endorsement.
So how did this immense entrenched political power collapse so quickly and dramatically?
It collapsed due to catastrophic moral and political scandal centered on the most powerful man in the state, Grand Dragon D.C. Stevenson. Stevenson, who infamously boasted, "I am the law in Indiana," was convicted in 1925 for the second-degree murder and brutal rape of a young woman named Madge Oberholzer.
That's a huge turning point.
It was. When Stevenson, expecting a pardon due to his political power, was denied one in 1927, he retaliated. He began leaking explosive documents to the Indianapolis Times, revealing widespread corruption, bribery, and the names of high-ranking officials the Klan had paid off, right up to the governor's office. The scandal utterly destroyed the Klan's legitimacy, turning membership into political poison almost overnight. The political weight and emotional trauma of that public downfall were immense.
That moment of political reckoning clears the slate just in time for the Great Depression in the 1930s.
It brought a sharp political swing. Franklin Roosevelt won the state in 1932, and Democratic Governor Paul V. McNutt took office. McNutt took extreme measures to deal with the economic crisis, including introducing the state's first income tax, ending prohibition, and even using martial law multiple times to quell violent worker strikes, highlighting the intensity of labor disputes during the decade.
World War II then officially pulls the state out of the Depression, relying on its established industrial base.
Yes, Indiana became a crucial part of the arsenal of democracy. The state ranks 8th among all states in total, U.S. military armaments manufactured, producing 4.5% of the national total. This wartime mobilization solidified manufacturing as the state's economic bedrock.
Moving into the post-war era, we see civil rights progress.
Formal progress was made. School desegregation began in 1949, and the Indiana Civil Rights Bill was passed in 1963, guaranteeing equal protection in employment. However, by the 1970s, the state began facing the painful economic headwinds of the latter half of the century.
The recessions tied to the 1973 oil crisis hit Indiana's manufacturing sector hard.
Critically hard. The auto sector crisis led to decades of downsizing and chronic unemployment in established manufacturing centers like Anderson, Muncie, and Kokomo. This prompted a slow but essential shift in the 1980s toward economic diversification, focusing on services, logistics, and high-tech manufacturing, a pivot that continues today.
And wrapping up the historical overview, the sources provide those stark 21st century rankings that show a state dealing with a complex legacy.
They absolutely do. While Indiana has strong fiscal numbers and recovered employment post-COVID, comparative national rankings highlight structural issues. The state ranked 40th in overall economic growth and business environment in 2025. It ranked well in affordability, 18th nationally. But the most alarming data point, which speaks directly to its heavy industrial past and reliance on coal, is that Indiana ranked worst among all 50 U.S. states for pollution and the natural environment.
That contrast economic strength built on an environmental deficit leads us perfectly into Section 3, Geography. The nickname Crossroads of America isn't just a political slogan, it's a topographical reality.
It is. Geographically, Indiana is the 38th largest state, spanning 250 miles north to south and 145 miles east to west. It sits at a crucial junction, bordering Lake Michigan in the northwest, the Ohio River to the south, separating it from Kentucky, and the Wabash River to the west, separating it from Illinois.
What strikes me is the dramatic geological difference between the glaciated north and the rugged south. It's like two different states physically.
It's entirely a story of the Ice Age. The northern and central regions are defined by vast, flat till plains deposits left by massive glaciers, which created the exceptionally fertile soil of the Corn Belt. The average elevation is remarkably low, at only about 760 feet above sea level. This flatness is perfect for agriculture and for laying down highways and rail lines.
So if the north is flat, where's the dramatic topography?
You find it in two distinct regions. First, in the far northwest, along the Lake Michigan shore, you have the protected Indiana Dunes National Park, where sand dunes, created by the action of the lake and wind, can reach nearly 200 feet high. Second, you look south of the historic glacial boundary. Southern Indiana is rugged, hilly, and characterized by exposed bedrock and the famous Indiana limestone. This unglaciated region is responsible for the state's many caves, caverns, and quarries.
Speaking of that limestone, it's not just a geological feature, it's a national resource used for many famous buildings, right?
Exactly. Indiana limestone is the state rock and is renowned for its durability and aesthetic quality. It was used in the construction of the Empire State Building, the National Cathedral, and numerous government buildings in Washington, D.C. It's a literal cornerstone of American architectural history.
And the state has the narrowest elevation span of any non-coastal state. Why is that fact significant?
The total elevation difference between the highest point, Hoosier Hill, at 12,257 feet, and the lowest point at the confluence of the Ohio and Wabash Rivers at 318 feet is only 937 feet. That narrow range tells you just how much of the state is dominated by those central low-till plains. It reinforces the idea that Indiana is engineered for horizontal movement. It's ideal for infrastructure.
Let's talk about the Wabash River, which holds immense cultural weight.
The Wabash is the official state river and a hydrological landmark. It is the longest free-flowing river east of the Mississippi River, stretching 475 miles, bisecting the state and forming the border with Illinois. Its cultural importance is undeniable. It's immortalized in the official state anthem, On the Banks of the Wabash, Far Away, composed by Paul Dresser.
Moving to the climate, Indiana has always been classified as humid continental, but you mentioned a recent update that suggests a shift.
Yes, a 2016 update to climate classification actually designated nearly half the state, primarily the southern portion, as humid subtropical, CAH. This indicates that the state is receiving more precipitation than previously noted, which contributes to the excellent agricultural conditions, but also to environmental runoff issues.
And the weather extremes are regionalized, specifically the snowfall.
The difference is massive.
Mhm.
Northwest Indiana, due to the intense lake effect from Lake Michigan, can receive up to 80 inches of annual snowfall. But if you travel to the far southern counties, the annual average drops drastically to around 14 inches. The lake effect is responsible for roughly half the snowfall in the northern third of the state.
We also have to address the state's relationship with big storms. Being in the Midwest, people immediately think of Tornado Alley.
And here's where it gets really interesting for the listener. Despite Indiana being ranked 8th among the top 20 tornado-prone states, and Indianapolis ranking 8th among the most tornado-prone U.S. cities, Indiana is not officially considered part of Tornado Alley, which primarily includes the Plains states further west. This emphasizes the regional, localized vulnerability to severe weather outside of the nationally recognized danger zone.
Finally, we must tackle the state's administrative headache, the time zone debate. This is a perpetual source of confusion.
It is. Indiana is one of only 13 states divided into multiple time zones. The majority of the state observes Eastern Time, aligning it with the major East Coast cities. However, 12 counties, 6 in the northwest near Chicago and 6 in the southwest near Evansville, observe Central Time. Historically, the entire state resisted observing daylight saving time for decades, creating further confusion. It wasn't until 2006 that the entire state uniformly began observing DST, but the Central-Eastern split remains contentious, reflecting the pull of the major metropolitan areas, Chicago to the west and Cincinnati-Louisville to the east.
Let's turn our attention to the demographics and the people who inhabit this crossroads. The population is nearly 7 million, the 17th most populous state, and the growth is not evenly distributed.
Population growth since 1990 has been laser-focused on the Indianapolis metropolitan area. Hamilton County, the wealthy suburban ring just north of Indianapolis, is the 20th fastest-growing county nationally. It is the center of the modern booming economy.
And this creates that stark internal contrast we touched on earlier, the tale of two economies within one state.
Absolutely. Indianapolis is the largest city, the 15th largest in the U.S., and its suburbs like Fishers have seen population growth exceeding 100% since the year 2000. These are affluent, rapidly expanding communities. Conversely, older, industrial Rust Belt cities in the Northwest like Gary and Hammond have suffered massive population declines. Gary's, for instance, has lost 21% of its residents since 2000 as heavy industry contracted.
Let's delve into ancestry. German is dominant, but I want to talk about that unusual 7.2% who simply list their ancestry as American.
That 7.2% is highly instructive. When people report their ancestry as American, especially in a state like Indiana with deep roots, it usually signifies long resident European descent, often English, where the family has been in the country since the colonial or early frontier era, and their specific European national identity has been lost or simply replaced by a singular American identity. This highlights the long history of white settlement following the frontier era.
What about the diversity in the state? Where are the key minority groups concentrated?
The African American population is heavily concentrated. Nearly two-thirds, 62%, reside in just two counties, Marion County, Indianapolis, and Lake County, Gary. The Hispanic population is the fastest-growing minority, now constituting 7.8% of the total, largely of Mexican ancestry. But here's a specific detail that shows the global nature of the crossroads. Fort Wayne is home to one of the largest communities of Burmese immigrants in the United States, drawn there through religious and resettlement programs. It's a truly diverse modern enclave in the heartland.
When we look at income, the contrast between the new growth centers and the rest of the state becomes painfully clear.
It does. The statewide median household income is $69,500, ranking 37th nationally average to below average. However, the wealth accumulated in Hamilton County is extreme. Their median income is nearly $35,000 above the state average, ranking 7th nationally for mid-sized counties. You have pockets of hyper-affluence directly adjacent to areas that are struggling with the legacy of industrial decline, creating significant internal inequality.
Finally, the religious landscape. While often stereotyped as a uniformly Protestant heartland, the reality is more nuanced.
It is deeply religious, with the Protestant majority Methodist is the largest specific Protestant denomination. But the largest single denomination is Catholic, with over 747,000 members. What's fascinating, and speaks to the state's central location, is its role as a headquarters for multiple denominations and religious institutions.
Give us some examples of those religious centers.
We have the Benedictine St. Meinrad Archabbey in the south, which is one of only two Catholic archabbeys in the entire U.S. The headquarters for several evangelical Methodist denominations, including the Free Methodist Church and the Wesleyan Church, are located in the Indianapolis area, as is the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. Furthermore, the Islamic Society of North America, a major continent-wide organization, is headquartered in Plainfield, near Indianapolis.
And we can't forget the significant presence of Anabaptist communities.
Exactly. Indiana has the third largest Amish population in the United States, primarily concentrated in the northern counties around Elkhart and LaGrange. This demonstrates a remarkably diverse, historical, and deeply spiritual core to the state's identity.
Let's explore how the state governs itself, starting with that powerful, self-imposed constraint we mentioned earlier, the constitutional ban on debt stemming from the 1836 financial trauma.
That fiscal conservatism is the bedrock of Indiana's modern government. The state operates under a constitutional ban on assuming public debt, which means the government cannot issue bonds or borrow money for operational expenses or capital projects without significant political hurdles. This commitment to stability and avoiding the mistakes of the past is why Indiana is one of the few states to have consistently held AAA bond credit ratings from all three major agencies since 2010.
That AAA rating signals impeccable fiscal health. How is it maintained beyond simply banning debt?
It's maintained through disciplined budgeting and the requirement for a significant rainy day fund or surplus, which is constitutionally mandated to absorb any unexpected economic shocks. The state cannot spend money it doesn't already have. This is a huge factor in why Indiana ranked first in the 2017 Best States for Government listing, praised specifically for budget transparency and fiscal stability.
What about the legislative branch, the General Assembly? You mentioned a unique rule about uniformity.
Yes. The General Assembly, the bicameral state legislature, must pass laws that apply uniformly across the entire state. This means they cannot pass legislation that specifically targets or grants special authority to a particular city, county, or community. This prevents a lot of localized, ad hoc governance often seen in other states. Furthermore, the House of Representatives holds the sole constitutional authority to initiate legislation that affects state revenue or taxation.
And the judiciary, how are the Supreme Court judges selected in this system?
They utilize a merit selection or commission system. A special commission screens applicants and provides a list of qualified candidates to the governor. The governor then makes an appointment. After serving for 2 years, the judge must stand for a retention election by popular vote to secure a full 10-year term. It's a hybrid approach designed to balance merit and public accountability.
Moving to political identity, Indiana is known today as a reliably Republican red state. But we can't overlook its historical significance in national presidential politics.
Indiana was once absolutely central to presidential politics. From 1880 to 1924, a Hoosier resident was on the national ticket, either president or vice president, in all but one presidential election. The most famous example is Benjamin Harrison, the only president from Indiana, elected in 1888. We also have numerous vice presidents, including Dan Quayle and Mike Pence in the modern era.
But the modern political tilt is dramatically Republican.
It is pronounced. Since 1900, the state has voted for a Democratic presidential candidate only 5 times. The most recent was Barack Obama's narrow victory in 2008. In most elections, the Republican candidate wins by a double-digit margin. Republicans currently hold supermajorities in the General Assembly and have held the governorship continuously since 2005.
But the electoral geography shows a deep urban-rural split, reflecting those demographic shifts.
You can draw a clear map of the divide. The eastern and central regions, including the booming suburbs, are staunchly Republican. However, the urban centers are deep blue. Lake County, which contains the old industrial powerhouses near Chicago, hasn't voted Republican since 1972. Marion County, Indianapolis, historically was Republican, but has voted Democrat consistently since 2004. So the state operates politically as red territory dotted with large, crucial blue islands.
Let's discuss some specific policy notes that have garnered national attention.
3 areas stand out. First, voting rights. Indiana was ranked by some sources as the 10th hardest state for citizens to vote in during the 2020 election, reflecting strict voter ID laws and registration processes. Second, abortion. It's currently illegal in the state with limited exceptions following legislative action.
And third, the state's approach to expanded Medicaid is unique and, as you noted, controversial.
It is unique under the ACA expansion. Indiana requires enrollees to contribute to a power account, which is essentially a health savings account for beneficiaries. The argument is that this promotes personal responsibility and engagement with healthcare costs. However, critics strongly argue that requiring even small contributions creates an unnecessary financial barrier, effectively locking out the lowest income individuals who struggle to make those payments, potentially undermining the goal of access.
Finally, let's highlight the immense military footprint the state holds.
The Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane Division, located southwest of Bloomington, is geographically massive. The third largest naval installation in the world, covering 108 square miles. It is vital for defense research, testing, and logistics.
And within that installation, there's an amazing historical connection to the world's oldest commissioned warship.
That is Constitution Grosh. It's a 64,000-acre forest located inside NSWC Crane that contains old-growth white oaks. These specific trees are cultivated, protected, and reserved specifically for the maintenance and repair of the USS Constitution. It's a profound, literal connection between the hardwood forests of Indiana and the maritime history of the United States.
Moving now to culture, arts, and the undisputed dominance of sports, Indiana has defined the idea of the American heartland, and that definition was built through a literary boom.
That's right. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were known as the golden age of Indiana literature, which truly codified the state's image as the authentic, traditional American heartland. It was an extremely productive period.
What works came out of that literary boom that listeners would recognize?
It started with Edward Eggleston's The Hoosier Schoolmaster in 1871, which was the first truly national bestseller to originate in the state. Then you have General Lew Wallace's Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ in 1880, which was one of the best-selling books globally of its time. And central to the romantic vision of Indiana was James Whitcomb Riley, the Hoosier poet, who wrote hundreds of poems with Hoosier themes, including the incredibly popular Little Orphan Annie.
And we also see the visual arts respond to the landscape.
Absolutely. We see the emergence of the Hoosier School of landscape painting, including artists like T.C. Steele. They were known for using vivid, natural colors, often inspired by the rolling hills and deep woods of southern Indiana. Paul Dresser, a brother of Theodore Dreiser, composed the state anthem, On the Banks of the Wabash, Far Away, cementing the state's lyrical identity.
But all of this, the literature, the poetry, the art, is now overshadowed by one cultural force: basketball. You called it a religion, and the numbers back that up.
They absolutely do. Indiana is indisputably the center of the basketball universe. The state has produced more National Basketball Association players per capita than any other state in the country. To localize that further, Muncie, Indiana has produced the most NBA players per capita of any U.S. city, with 2 other Hoosier cities also in the top 10.
That's amazing concentration. Even James Naismith, the inventor of the sport, recognized this unique devotion.
He traveled there in 1925, watched a massive state finals game in a venue packed with 15,000 screaming fans, and later wrote, "Basketball really had its origin in Indiana, which remains the center of the sport." That heritage is deeply rooted in the small-town, single-class high school system, famously portrayed in the 1986 film Hoosiers, based on the true underdog story of Milan High School winning the 1954 state championship.
And of course, the legacy of Larry Bird is foundational to this story.
Larry Bird, one of the greatest players in NBA history, is a native Hoosier raised in French Lick, who played for Indiana State University before his legendary career with the Boston Celtics. His success reinforced the idea that greatness on the hardwood comes straight from the Indiana soil.
Beyond the hardwood, Indiana is also synonymous with the roar of engines in motorsports.
It is the global capital of motorsports. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is home to the Indianapolis 500, dubbed the greatest spectacle in racing. The event attracts over 250,000 people, making it the largest single-day sporting event in the world by attendance. The venue also hosts NASCAR's Brickyard 400. Furthermore, Indiana hosts the world's largest and most prestigious drag race, the NHRA Mack Tools U.S. Nationals, held annually near Indianapolis.
What professional teams call Indiana home outside of auto racing?
Indianapolis fields 3 major professional teams: the NFL Colts, who won Super Bowl XLI, the NBA Pacers, and the WNBA Fever. It's also noteworthy that the state's industrial cities, like Hammond and Muncie, were home to 2 of the charter members of the original National Football League, the Hammond Pros and the Muncie Flyers, showing deep, if sometimes forgotten, roots in professional football history.
And college athletics are just as critical to the state's identity as the pros.
Collegiate excellence is paramount. In basketball, the Indiana Hoosiers have claimed 5 NCAA men's national championships, while the Purdue Boilermakers have won 26 Big Ten championships. In football, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are one of the most recognizable college programs in the nation, boasting 11 consensus national championships and a history of dominating major bowl games.
Let's transition now to the economy, where Indiana truly earns its title as the crossroads of America through its sheer industrial output.
Indiana is defined by manufacturing. It holds the highest percentage, nearly 17% of its non-farm workforce employed in manufacturing of any U.S. state. It's not just volume, it's high-value goods. The top exports include motor vehicles and auto parts, pharmaceutical products, industrial machinery, and medical equipment.
That's a huge commitment to manufacturing. Why has Indiana, unlike some of its neighbors, been less affected by the infamous Rust Belt decline?
That is the core economic insight here, the skills at a discount advantage. Firms find that the historical, decentralized industrial base in Indiana has created a deep reservoir of highly skilled technical and mechanical labor, particularly in medium and smaller cities. Since the cost of living and therefore average wages in these cities are lower than in massive metropolises like Chicago or Detroit, companies can access highly skilled labor for lower than average wages. This makes Indiana highly cost competitive for complex industrial location.
And that focus on high-skill, high-value manufacturing is reflected in the Fortune 500 companies headquartered there.
Absolutely. Indiana is home to 7 Fortune 500 companies. The pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly, headquartered in Indianapolis, is the state's largest corporation and a major global player. Indiana ranks 5th among all U.S. states in total sales of pharmaceutical products. Furthermore, Northwest Indiana maintains its status as the largest steel-producing center in the U.S. since 1975, home to Steel Dynamics, the 3rd largest producer of carbon steel products nationally. Another key sector is orthopedic and surgical products, dominated by Zimmer Biomet in Warsaw.
So high-tech manufacturing sits alongside the traditional agricultural strength.
Correct. The state is deeply rooted in the U.S. Corn Belt and Grain Belt, ranking as the 5th largest corn producer and a major producer of soybeans. And we must mention the state's famous specialty products. It's a major producer of mint and, appropriately, popcorn, which is the official state snack. Beyond crops, the lumber industry supports significant furniture making, leveraging natural resources like Indiana limestone, the state rock.
Let's talk infrastructure, the physical manifestation of the crossroads. The state's transportation network is massive.
It is the reason for the nickname. The state is crisscrossed by major intersecting interstates I-65, I-70, I-74, and I-80-90, making it central to national logistics. Transportation is a massive government priority. The state is currently undertaking a multi-billion-dollar project extending I-69, aiming to create a continuous modern route connecting Evansville in the south all the way up to Indianapolis.
What about rail and water transportation?
Over 4,255 miles of rail run through the state, largely operated by Class I railroads like CSX. The South Shore Line provides critical commuter rail connection from South Bend into Chicago. Water transportation is also vital, with over 70 million tons of cargo shipped annually via the Ohio River and access to Lake Michigan. The Ports of Indiana manages 3 major inland ports: Burns Harbor on Lake Michigan, Jeffersonville, and Mount Vernon on the Ohio River, which are critical economic gateways.
Finally, energy production is where that industrial might collides with the modern environmental challenges we noted earlier.
This is the starkest illustration of Indiana's industrial legacy. Power production relies chiefly on coal, with 24 coal power plants operating. The state is home to the country's largest coal plant, the Gibson Generating Station, and critically, it houses the power plant with the single highest sulfur dioxide emissions in the entire United States, the Gallagher Power Plant.
That directly connects back to Indiana ranking worst in the nation for pollution.
It does. The state has enormous, easily accessible coal reserves, estimated at 57 billion tons. This continued abundance and low cost have slowed the transition to renewables, despite rapid growth in wind power, nearly 3,000 milliW by 2020. The reliance on coal remains the biggest environmental and public health challenge to the state's future.
Let's finish our deep dive by examining Indiana's commitment to education. This is where the state's historical ideals meet its most pressing modern crisis.
The ambition started brilliantly. Indiana's 1816 Constitution was truly pioneering. It was the first state constitution in the country to mandate a state-funded public school system and specifically allocated land for a public university. This was an extraordinarily progressive vision for a pioneer society.
But implementation was delayed, and the schools were segregated early on.
Implementation was painfully slow. And after 1843, the legislature barred African Americans from attending public schools, forcing them to establish their own privately funded institutions, such as the Union Literary Institute. It wasn't until 1877 that the state allowed integrated schools, and formal desegregation wasn't fully enforced until 1949.
Despite that, the state maintains a strong vocational focus, reflecting its industrial base.
It's an ingrained tradition. The state is home to Charles Allen Prosser, often called the father of vocational education in the United States. Indiana has a robust vocational school system where high school students can receive job training and placement assistance in trades, supported by organizations like the International Union of Operating Engineers. This vocational focus is key to maintaining that skills at a discount advantage.
What about higher education? The state is home to some of the highest-ranking institutions in the country.
The higher education landscape is dominated by what we call the three pillars of research: Indiana University Bloomington, Purdue University West Lafayette, and the private University of Notre Dame. Crucially, all three are R1 research institutions, which means they are classified by the Carnegie classification as having the highest level of research activity and doctoral output in the U.S.
So we're talking top-tier academic powerhouses.
Absolutely. Purdue, particularly, has engineering programs that rank fourth nationally. But perhaps the most remarkable long-standing success story is Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology, which has been ranked the nation's top undergraduate engineering school for 25 consecutive years. Additionally, the Indiana University School of Medicine is one of the largest medical school systems in the country.
This sounds like an incredibly robust and high-achieving system, which makes this next detail the most alarming counterpoint to the state's historical ideals and economic strategy.
This is the crucial modern challenge revealed by the data. Indiana is facing a profound enrollment crisis. The rate of Indiana high school students choosing to attend college or post-secondary education has absolutely plummeted, falling sharply from 65% in 2017 to a shocking 53% in 2022.
That's a massive and unprecedented drop in only 5 years. What are the implications of that?
That drop is steeper than in most states and is creating an immediate crisis in workforce development. It highlights widening gaps for minority and low-income students who aren't pursuing higher education. If that decline continues, it poses a direct existential threat to the state's entire economic model, that skills at a discount advantage, because the pipeline of high-skilled labor will eventually dry up. The state cannot be an industrial powerhouse if it is not investing in the next generation's intellectual capital.
It is the profound structural weakness hiding beneath the surface of that impeccable AAA credit rating.
Precisely. The cost of future underinvestment far outweighs the savings from today's fiscal conservatism.
What a journey through the Hoosier state. We've traced the incredible contrasts, the mysterious, roughneck origin of the term Hoosier, followed by a history of fierce independence against both indigenous resistance and British military power. We charted the state's dark political phase under the KKK's control and its dramatic collapse following the D.C. Stevenson scandal. Culturally, it is the center of the basketball universe and the global capital of motorsports. Economically, its strength is built on manufacturing ingenuity and its status as the crossroads of America.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, the sources present a state that, throughout its history, has consistently excelled at grand material projects, from the canals of the 1830s to the interstates, steel mills, and pharmaceutical factories of today. The core identity is one of relentless buildings, underpinned by fierce fiscal stability mandated by the memory of past debt. Yet, the data reveals persistent and pressing modern issues, the worst ranking in the nation for pollution, and a sharp, worrying decline in educational attainment that threatens to erode the very skilled workforce that underpins its economic advantage.
So the question remains whether the state can reconcile its past.
Indeed. This raises an important question for you, the listener, and for the state itself. What happens to a state that prides itself on a constitutional ban on assuming debt, on maintaining fiscal stability above all else, but struggles to invest adequately in its environment and, more critically, in the next generation's intellectual capital? The historical trauma of the 1836 debt crisis led to the ban, which now structurally impedes the necessary investment to solve the modern crisis in education. Can Indiana maintain its status as the industrial and logistical crossroads of America if its skilled labor force shrinks and its quality of life is compromised?
A truly compelling contrast between the successes of its economic model and the looming structural threat to its future. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Whether it was the fact that a forest inside a naval base is growing wood for the USS Constitution, or the shocking severity of the collapse of clan political power, we hope one element of this deep dive stands out most to you. Until next time.